The sun was setting over Maple Ridge, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. James Carter drove his black Mercedes sedan through the quiet neighborhood, tired but content after a long shift at the hospital. He had just finished a 12-hour day in the emergency room, saving lives and dealing with one crisis after another. All he wanted now was to get home, take a hot shower, and maybe watch some television before bed. The streets were mostly empty at this hour. Large houses with perfectly trimmed lawns lined both sides of the road. James had driven through this area hundreds of times. It was a shortcut between the hospital and his home, shaving off about 10 minutes from his commute. He kept his speed steady, 5 miles below the limit as always. His father had taught him long ago to be extra careful when driving, especially in neighborhoods like this one. In his rearview mirror, James noticed a police car appear from a side street. The patrol vehicle fell in behind him, keeping pace. James felt his stomach tighten slightly, but he told himself there was no reason to worry. He was doing nothing wrong. His registration was current, his insurance was paid, and he had not broken any traffic laws. Still, his hands gripped the steering wheel a bit tighter. The red and blue lights suddenly flashed on. The siren gave a short chirp. James's heart sank. He took a deep breath and put on his turn signal, carefully pulling over to the curb. He shifted the car into park and placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be clearly seen. His father's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him of the rules he had learned as a teenager. Keep your hands visible. Move slowly, speak respectfully, and stay calm no matter what happens. Through his side mirror, James watched the officer exit his patrol car. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, probably in his early 40s. His uniform was crisp and his movements were deliberate as he approached the driver's side window. James noticed the officer's hand resting on his belt, close to his weapon. This made James more nervous, but he kept his face neutral and his hands on the wheel. The officer tapped on the window with his flashlight, even though it was still light enough to see clearly. James pressed the button to lower the window halfway. The officer leaned down slightly, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses despite the fading daylight. License and registration, the officer said. His voice was flat and cold, with no greeting or explanation for the stop. Of course, officer, James replied politely. Can you tell me why you pulled me over? The officer's jaw tightened. License and registration first. Then we'll talk, James nodded slowly. I'm going to reach into my glove compartment now to get my registration. My wallet is in my jacket pocket. Just do it, the officer said, standing back slightly. James moved very slowly and deliberately. He opened the glove compartment and retrieved the registration papers, then carefully reached into his jacket pocket for his wallet. He handed both items through the window. The officer took them without a word and walked back to his patrol car. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. James sat perfectly still, wondering what was taking so long. A simple license check should not take this much time. He glanced at his phone on the passenger seat, thinking about calling his wife to let her know he would be late. But he decided against it, not wanting to make any sudden movements. Finally, the officer returned. He handed back the license and registration through the window. Step out of the vehicle, he ordered. James felt his pulse quicken. May I ask why, officer? What did I do wrong? Your taillight is out. I need you to step out of the vehicle now. James knew his taillights were fine. He had just had the car serviced 2 weeks ago and everything had been checked. But he also knew that arguing would only make things worse. He unbuckled his seatbelt slowly. I'm opening the door now, James said clearly, wanting to narrate his movements to avoid any misunderstanding. He stepped out onto the sidewalk, keeping his hands visible at his sides. The officer immediately positioned himself in a way that made James feel cornered against his own car. Up close, James could see the officer's name tag. Mitchell, is this your car? Officer Mitchell asked, his tone accusatory. Yes, it is, James replied calmly. You sure about that? This is an expensive vehicle. How does someone like you afford a car like this? The words hung in the air. Someone like you. James felt a flash of anger but pushed it down. He had dealt with this kind of thing before, though never quite so blatantly. I work hard for what I have, James said, keeping his voice even. I'm a doctor at County General Hospital. Officer Mitchell smirked. A doctor, right, and I'm the president. You got any proof of that? My hospital ID is in my wallet, which you already looked at, James pointed out. Mitchell ignored this. I'm going to need to search your vehicle. Step over there. He pointed to a spot on the sidewalk several feet away. Officer, I don't consent to a search. I haven't done anything wrong. A taillight issue doesn't give you cause to search my car. Mitchell's face reddened. Oh, so now you're a lawyer too? You trying to tell me how to do my job? No, sir. I'm just exercising my rights. Your rights, Mitchell repeated mockingly. Well, I've got a right to ensure officer safety. I smell marijuana coming from your vehicle. That's not true, James said firmly. I don't use drugs and there's nothing illegal in my car. But Mitchell was already opening the back door of the sedan. He began pulling things out. A gym bag, some medical journals, a box of supplies James was bringing home from the hospital. He threw each item onto the sidewalk carelessly. James felt helpless as he watched his belongings scattered on the ground. A few neighbors had come out of their houses, attracted by the flashing lights. Some held up their phones, recording the scene. This gave James a small sense of relief. At least there would be witnesses. Officer Mitchell, James said, his voice strained but still respectful. You're searching my car without cause. This isn't right, and you know it. Mitchell straightened up from where he had been rummaging through the trunk. His hand moved to his radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I need backup at Maple and 7th. I've got an uncooperative suspect here. I'm not uncooperative, James protested. I've done everything you asked. Backup en route, came the voice from the radio. Mitchell turned back to James with a satisfied smile. You just wait right there. We'll see what you have to say when my fellow officers arrive. We'll get to the bottom of whatever you're hiding. James said nothing. He simply stood there on the sidewalk, his expensive suit now looking rumpled, his dignity being stripped away piece by piece in front of his neighbors. He pulled out his phone and held it up, making sure the camera was recording. Put that away, Mitchell barked. I have a legal right to record this interaction, James said quietly. Mitchell took a step toward him, his hand moving to his weapon. I said put it away. James held the phone steady, his hand not shaking despite the fear coursing through his veins. He could hear sirens in the distance growing closer. Backup was coming. Mitchell clearly expected reinforcements to support his actions. What the officer did not know was that sometimes backup arrives with different intentions than expected. The sirens grew louder, and James whispered a silent prayer that whoever was coming would see this situation for what it really was. His entire body was tense, but his face remained calm. He had done nothing wrong, and the truth had to count for something. It had to. The sirens echoed through the quiet neighborhood, but the backup cars had not yet arrived. James stood on the sidewalk, his phone still recording while Officer Mitchell paced near the patrol car. The officer kept glancing at James with a look that mixed anger and something else. Maybe it was uncertainty. Maybe Mitchell was starting to realize that things might not go the way he expected. More neighbors had gathered now. An elderly white woman stood on her porch, arms crossed, watching with concern. A younger couple stood in their driveway, the husband holding up his phone to record. A teenage boy on a bicycle had stopped on the opposite side of the street, his eyes wide as he watched the scene unfold. James noticed all of them, grateful for their presence even though he felt deeply embarrassed to be treated this way in public. What are all you people looking at? Mitchell shouted at the neighbors. Go back inside. This is police business, no one moved. The elderly woman actually took a step forward on her porch. I know this man, she called out. He's a doctor. He lives 2 streets over. What's going on here? Mitchell ignored her and turned back to James. So you got your little audience now, huh? You think these people recording makes a difference? You think that protects you? I think the truth protects me, James said quietly. I've done nothing wrong and everyone here can see that. Oh, you've done nothing wrong? Mitchell's voice dripped with sarcasm. Then why are you so nervous? Why won't you just cooperate? I have cooperated, James replied, fighting to keep his voice steady. I gave you my license and registration. I got out of the car when you asked. I've been respectful and calm. You refused to let me search your vehicle. That's not cooperation. That's my constitutional right. Refusing an illegal search isn't the same as being uncooperative. Mitchell's face turned a deeper shade of red. He took a step closer to James, invading his personal space. You think you're smart, don't you? You think you're better than me because you wear a nice suit and drive a fancy car? James said nothing. He had learned long ago that sometimes silence was the safest response. His father had taught him that too. When dealing with someone looking for an excuse to escalate, do not give them one. I asked you a question, Mitchell pressed. I don't think I'm better than anyone, James finally said. I just want to go home to my family. Your family, Mitchell repeated. Where do you live? What are you even doing in this neighborhood? I drive through here every day coming home from work. It's the quickest route. Mitchell nodded slowly as if this confirmed something in his mind. So you drive through here a lot. Maybe you've been casing these houses. Maybe you're not a doctor at all. Maybe you're looking for places to rob. James felt his anger rising but pushed it back down. This was getting worse, not better. The officer was building a narrative, creating a story that justified his actions. James had seen this before in the news, read about it in articles, heard about it from friends. But experiencing it firsthand was different. It was terrifying in a way he had not fully understood until now. Officer, you looked at my license. You know where I live. You can call the hospital and verify that I work there. This is all unnecessary. I'll decide what's necessary, Mitchell snapped. He walked over to the items scattered on the sidewalk and kicked at the gym bag. What's in here? Workout clothes and sneakers. I go to the gym after work sometimes. Mitchell unzipped the bag and dumped its contents onto the ground. Shorts, a t-shirt, socks, and athletic shoes tumbled out. He picked up the shoes and examined them carefully, as if expecting to find something hidden inside. Finding nothing, he tossed them aside and moved to the box of medical supplies. And this? Supplies from the hospital. Bandages, gloves, basic first aid items. Sometimes I take them to my church for their community health program. You just take supplies from your job? Isn't that stealing? No, James said, his patience wearing thin. The hospital donates them. It's part of our community outreach program. There's paperwork in the box if you want to see it. Mitchell opened the box and rifled through it carelessly. Boxes of bandages fell onto the sidewalk. A bottle of hand sanitizer rolled into the gutter. James watched helplessly as his belongings were treated like trash. The elderly neighbor called out again. Young man, are you okay? Do you need me to call anyone? Before James could respond, Mitchell whirled around. Ma'am, I told you to go inside. If you keep interfering, I'll cite you for obstruction. The woman's eyes narrowed. I'm standing on my own property. I have every right to be here. And I'm calling my son. He's an attorney. Mitchell's jaw clenched, but he turned back to James without responding to her. James caught the woman's eye and nodded gratefully. She nodded back and pulled out her phone. You know what I think? Mitchell said, moving closer to James again. I think this car is stolen. I think you're pretending to be some big-shot doctor, but really you're just a criminal who got lucky. Where'd you really get this car? Who'd you steal it from? I bought it with my own money, James said firmly. From the Mercedes dealership on Riverside Drive, I can show you the purchase papers. They're in the glove compartment. Oh, I bet you've got papers. Probably fake ones. You people always have fake papers, you people. There it was again. James felt something inside him harden. He had spent his entire adult life working hard, helping others and being a good citizen. He had saved lives, including the lives of police officers. And here he was being treated like a criminal because of the color of his skin. My papers are real, James said, his voice colder now. Everything about me is real. My education is real. My job is real. My right to be here is real. We'll see about that, Mitchell muttered. He went back to his patrol car and got on his radio again. Dispatch, what's the ETA on that backup? Units are 3 minutes out, came the response. James looked at his phone screen. The recording was still going. He had captured everything. Mitchell's accusations, his illegal search, his insulting comments. Whatever happened next, there would be evidence of the truth. The teenage boy on the bicycle called out suddenly. Sir, I saw everything. He didn't do nothing wrong. The officer just pulled him over for no reason. Mitchell spun toward the boy. Get out of here, kid. This doesn't concern you. I'm not leaving, the boy said bravely. My mom's a lawyer. She told me to always stay and witness if I see something wrong. More people had gathered now. It seemed like half the street had come out to watch. Some of them were talking among themselves, pointing at Mitchell, shaking their heads. James realized that public opinion was on his side, and this seemed to make Mitchell even more agitated. All of you need to disperse, Mitchell shouted. This is an active police investigation. Investigation of what? Someone called out. The man was just driving. Mitchell ignored them and turned back to James. His hand rested on his weapon again, and James felt his heart rate spike. This was the moment he had feared since the stop began. The moment when an angry officer with a gun decided to escalate things beyond words. "Put your hands on the car," Mitchell ordered. "Why?" James asked, trying to keep his voice calm even though panic was rising in his chest. "Because I'm telling you to. Do it now." James slowly placed his palms on the roof of his Mercedes. Mitchell moved behind him and kicked his feet apart roughly. James felt hands patting down his sides, his legs checking his pockets. It was humiliating being searched like a criminal in front of all these people. "He's clean," someone in the crowd said sarcastically. "Big surprise." Mitchell found James's wallet and pulled it out. He opened it and started going through it, pulling out credit cards, cash, and various ID cards. When he found James's hospital identification badge, he stared at it for a long moment. James turned his head slightly to see Mitchell's reaction. The officer's face showed confusion, then what looked like doubt. The badge was official, with James's photo, his title as Chief of Emergency Medicine, and the hospital logo. It was impossible to fake. But instead of apologizing or backing down, Mitchell's expression hardened into something worse. He had been wrong and now he knew it, but his pride would not let him admit it. James had seen this before too. The moment when someone realizes they made a mistake but decides to double down instead of making it right. "This could be fake," Mitchell said, though his voice lacked conviction. "It's not fake," James said quietly, "and you know it." The sirens were very close now. James could see flashing lights approaching from both directions. Backup was finally arriving. Mitchell straightened up, putting on an expression of authority and control. He clearly expected his fellow officers to support him, to back up his actions, to help him justify what he had done. But as the patrol cars pulled up and the officers stepped out, James allowed himself a small glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, someone would see the truth. Maybe someone would do the right thing. All he could do was wait and see who was about to enter this situation, and whose side they would choose. 2 patrol cars pulled up to the scene, their lights still flashing. The gathered crowd grew quiet, everyone watching to see what would happen next. James kept his hands visible, resting on the roof of his car, though every muscle in his body was tense. Officer Mitchell stood a few feet behind him, chest puffed out, ready to explain his actions to his fellow officers. The first patrol car's door opened, and a woman in uniform stepped out. She was shorter than Mitchell but carried herself with unmistakable authority. Her uniform was crisp and decorated with insignia that immediately caught James's attention. She was not just another patrol officer. The bars on her collar indicated a much higher rank. As she walked closer, James could read her name tag, Captain Rodriguez. Mitchell's confident expression faltered slightly. He clearly had not expected a captain to respond to his backup call. Captains usually did not respond to routine traffic stops, which meant someone at dispatch had flagged this situation as potentially problematic. The second patrol car stopped just behind the first. 2 more officers emerged. One was a younger man with sandy hair who looked fresh out of the academy. The other was an older black man whose uniform also displayed sergeant stripes. This was Sergeant Williams, and the moment he took in the scene, his entire body went rigid. Captain Rodriguez surveyed the situation with sharp eyes. She noted the crowd of neighbors with their phones out. She saw the items scattered across the sidewalk. She observed James standing against his expensive car with his hands visible, his body language showing someone trying very hard to stay calm, and she saw Mitchell standing there with his hand near his weapon, looking defensive. "Officer Mitchell," Captain Rodriguez said, her voice cutting through the evening air. "What's the situation here?" Mitchell straightened up and launched into his explanation. "Captain, I pulled over this vehicle for a broken taillight." The driver became argumentative and refused to comply with my instructions. He wouldn't consent to a vehicle search even though I detected the odor of marijuana. I felt the situation required backup for officer safety. James opened his mouth to speak, but Captain Rodriguez held up one hand, silencing him without even looking his way. She was still focused on Mitchell. "You smelled marijuana?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "And did you find any marijuana during your search?" Mitchell hesitated. "The search is still ongoing." "I see." Captain Rodriguez walked slowly around the Mercedes, examining it. She stopped at the rear of the vehicle and crouched down to look at the taillights. Both were working perfectly. She stood up and looked at Mitchell with an expression that made the officer shift uncomfortably. Sergeant Williams approached James. "Sir," You can put your hands down now." His voice was gentle, a stark contrast to Mitchell's tone earlier. James lowered his hands slowly, relief flooding through him. He turned to face the sergeant, and their eyes met. In that moment, James saw something he had not seen in Mitchell's eyes: understanding, empathy, and what looked like barely contained anger at the situation. "Are you injured?" Sergeant Williams asked quietly. "No, sir. Just shaken up." Williams nodded and turned to look at the items scattered on the sidewalk. His jaw tightened as he took in the medical supplies, the gym bag, the scattered personal belongings treated so carelessly. He picked up James's wallet from where Mitchell had dropped it on the hood of the patrol car. "May I?" Williams asked, holding up the wallet. "Yes, of course," James replied. Williams opened the wallet carefully and examined the hospital ID badge. His eyebrows rose slightly. He looked at James, then back at the badge, then at James again. He pulled out his phone and walked a few steps away, making a quiet call. Meanwhile, Captain Rodriguez was still questioning Mitchell. "Officer Mitchell, both taillights appear to be functioning properly. Can you explain the discrepancy?" "It must have been the angle I saw it from," Mitchell said quickly. "The light looked out when I was behind the vehicle." "I see. And the marijuana smell." "I'm trained to detect it, Captain. I know what I smelled." The younger officer, who had been standing quietly near his patrol car, spoke up hesitantly. "Captain, I don't smell anything like that now." Mitchell shot him an angry glare. "Well, it's been several minutes. The smell could have dissipated." Captain Rodriguez's expression remained neutral, but her eyes had grown colder. "Officer Mitchell, walk me through your probable cause for the search." "Like I said, the marijuana smell and the driver's suspicious behavior." "What suspicious behavior specifically?" Mitchell fumbled for words. "He was nervous. He questioned my authority. He refused the search." "Refusing a search is a constitutional right, not suspicious behavior," Rodriguez said flatly. "Was there anything else?" Before Mitchell could answer, Sergeant Williams returned. He held up his phone. "Captain, I just spoke with County General Hospital. Dr. James Carter is indeed their chief of emergency medicine. He's worked there for 8 years. Impeccable record. In fact," Williams paused, his voice growing tighter, "he's the doctor who saved Officer Brennan's life 3 months ago after that shooting on 5th Street, the crowd of neighbors murmured. Several people turned to look at James with new recognition. The elderly woman who had offered to call her attorney's son nodded vigorously as if this confirmed what she had been saying all along. Captain Rodriguez turned to James for the first time. "Dr. Carter, is that correct? You're the physician who treated Officer Brennan?" "Yes, ma'am," James said quietly. "He came in with a gunshot wound to the chest. We operated for 6 hours." Rodriguez's expression softened slightly, though her professional demeanor remained intact. "Officer Brennan returned to duty last month. His wife sent a thank you card to the station." She turned back to Mitchell with an expression that could freeze fire. "So let me make sure I understand this correctly, Officer Mitchell. You pulled over one of our city's most respected physicians, a man who literally saved the life of one of our own officers, on a pretense of a broken taillight that isn't broken. You accused him of having marijuana when there is clearly no marijuana. You conducted an illegal search of his vehicle, and you called for backup because you felt threatened by a man who, by all accounts, was completely cooperative." Mitchell's face had gone from red to pale. "Captain, I was just doing my job." "Your job?" Sergeant Williams stepped forward, his voice shaking with controlled fury. "Your job is to serve and protect. Your job is to uphold the law, not violate it. Your job is to treat every citizen with respect and dignity, regardless of what they look like or how expensive their car is." "I didn't do anything wrong," Mitchell protested, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "You did everything wrong," Williams said, "and you know it." Captain Rodriguez pulled out her radio. "Dispatch, this is Captain Rodriguez. I need a supervisor from Internal Affairs at Maple and 7th. Non-emergency, but priority." Mitchell's eyes went wide. "Captain, that's not necessary. This is just a misunderstanding." "Oh, I think it's very necessary," Rodriguez replied. She turned to James. "Dr. Carter, I need you to provide a statement about what happened here tonight. Every detail from the moment Officer Mitchell pulled you over until now." James nodded. He glanced at his phone, which was still recording. "I have the entire interaction on video, Captain." "Good. Please send that to the email address I'm going to give you." She pulled out a business card and handed it to him. I'm also going to need the contact information for any witnesses. The elderly neighbor stepped down from her porch. I saw the whole thing, Captain. So did most of the people on this street. That officer, she pointed at Mitchell, was out of line from the start. He was rude, aggressive, and accusatory. Dr. Carter here was nothing but polite and respectful. The teenage boy on the bicycle wheeled closer. I got it on video too. I can send it to you. Several other neighbors offered similar statements. Captain Rodriguez took down names and contact information, while Sergeant Williams helped James gather his belongings from the sidewalk. The sergeant handled each item with care, apologizing quietly as he placed them back in the car. Mitchell stood alone near his patrol car, watching his world crumble around him. The younger officer who had come with Sergeant Williams stood nearby, looking uncomfortable and uncertain. This was clearly not the kind of situation they taught about in the academy. Officer Mitchell, Captain Rodriguez said, once she had finished with the witnesses, "You are to return to the station immediately. You will write a detailed report of tonight's events. Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., you will report to Internal Affairs for questioning. Until this investigation is complete, you are on administrative duty. That means desk work only. No patrol, no contact with the public. Do you understand?" "Captain, this is an overreaction," Mitchell tried one more time. "I made a judgment call. That's what we're trained to do." "You made a series of terrible decisions based on prejudice and bias," Rodriguez corrected him. "And those decisions have consequences. Now get in your car and return to the station. Officer Davis will follow you to make sure you get there." The younger Officer Davis nodded and moved toward his patrol car. Mitchell stood there for another moment, looking between Rodriguez, Williams, and James. For a second, James thought he saw something like regret cross the officer's face. But then it was gone, replaced by anger and resentment. Mitchell got into his patrol car without another word. As he drove away, followed by Officer Davis, the crowd of neighbors began to disperse. Several of them stopped to speak to James, offering apologies and support. The elderly woman squeezed his hand and told him she was proud of how he had handled himself. When most of the neighbors had gone back to their homes, Captain Rodriguez approached James. "Dr. Carter, on behalf of the department, I apologize for what happened here tonight. This is not how we train our officers. This is not the standard we hold them to. What Officer Mitchell did was wrong on every level." "Thank you, Captain," James said. His voice was steady, but inside he was still shaking. Sergeant Williams stood beside Rodriguez. "I want you to know, Dr. Carter, that not all of us are like Mitchell. Most of us got into this job to help people, to make our community safer. Officers like him make it harder for the rest of us to do our jobs and earn the trust of the people we serve." James nodded. He believed them. But he also knew that good intentions were not enough. The system that allowed officers like Mitchell to act this way needed to change. "What happens now?" James asked. "Now we investigate," Rodriguez said. "And based on what I've seen tonight and what these witnesses have said, Officer Mitchell is going to face serious consequences. I promise you that." As James finally got back into his car, his hands were still trembling. The sun had set completely now, and the streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement. He had done nothing wrong, yet he had been treated like a criminal. The only reason things had turned out okay was because the right people had shown up as backup. But what about all the times when the wrong people showed up? What about all the people who did not have witnesses with cameras? What about those who were not lucky enough to have saved a police officer's life? These questions haunted James as he drove away, heading finally toward home. The incident was over, but its impact was just beginning. Captain Rodriguez stood under the streetlight, her tablet in hand, reviewing the notes she had taken from witnesses. Sergeant Williams was still helping James organize the items that had been thrown from his car. The atmosphere had shifted completely from when Officer Mitchell had been in charge of the scene. Now there was a sense of order, of justice beginning to take its proper shape. "Dr. Carter," Rodriguez said, looking up from her tablet, "I need you to walk me through exactly what happened from the very beginning. Take your time. Every detail matters." James took a deep breath. His heart rate had finally started to slow down, though his hand still felt shaky. "I was driving home from the hospital. I had just finished a 12-hour shift. I came through this neighborhood like I always do because it's the quickest route home." "What time did Officer Mitchell pull you over?" Rodriguez asked, her stylus poised over her tablet. "About 6:30, maybe 6:35. I can check the timestamp on my video. We'll do that in a moment. Continue, please. James described how he had noticed the patrol car behind him, how the lights had come on suddenly, how he had carefully pulled over and kept his hands visible. He explained every interaction with Mitchell, every accusation, every illegal demand. His voice remained steady, though the emotion behind his words was clear. Rodriguez listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. Sergeant Williams stood nearby, his expression growing darker with every detail James shared. When James described how Mitchell had implied he must have stolen the car, Williams shook his head in disgust. "And you have all of this on video?" Rodriguez asked when James had finished. "Yes, ma'am, starting from when he first asked me to step out of the vehicle." James pulled out his phone and found the video file. "Should I send it to you now?" "Please do. And please send it to this email address as well." Rodriguez handed him another card. "That's internal affairs. They'll want to see it first thing tomorrow." While James was sending the video files, Sergeant Williams approached Captain Rodriguez. They spoke in low voices, but James could hear parts of their conversation. "This is bad, Captain," Williams said quietly. "Real bad. If this video goes public, when it goes public," Rodriguez corrected. "Those neighbors all have copies too. This will be all over social media by tomorrow morning." Williams nodded grimly. "We need to get ahead of this. We need to show that we took immediate action. We are taking immediate action," Rodriguez said firmly. "Mitchell's on administrative duty pending investigation. IA will interview him tomorrow, and depending on what they find, he could be looking at termination." "Could be?" Williams's voice rose slightly. "Captain, with all due respect, what we witnessed here tonight is grounds for immediate dismissal. Mitchell racially profiled this man, conducted an illegal search, made false accusations, and showed absolutely no remorse. If we don't come down hard on this, we're sending a message that this behavior is acceptable." "I agree with you, Sergeant. But we have to follow procedure. IA has to do their investigation. We have to build an airtight case so that when we do terminate him, it sticks. Otherwise, the union will get him reinstated and we'll be right back where we started." James had finished sending the videos. He put his phone back in his pocket and turned to face the two officers. "Captain Rodriguez, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Dr. Carter. Has Officer Mitchell done this before? Has there been other complaints?" Rodriguez and Williams exchanged a glance. There was something in that look, a shared knowledge that they were debating whether to share. "I can't discuss another officer's personnel file with you," Rodriguez said carefully, "but I can tell you that once IA begins their investigation, they will look at the complete history of the officer in question. If there are patterns, they will be discovered." The way she emphasized the word patterns told James everything he needed to know. Mitchell had done this before. Maybe not exactly this, maybe not caught on camera like this, but there had been other incidents, other complaints, other people who had been treated unfairly and had no one believe them. "How many?" James asked quietly. "How many other people has he done this to?" "Dr. Carter, I really can't." "Please," James interrupted, his voice passionate now. "I need to know. Because I'm standing here thinking about how lucky I am. Lucky that I had witnesses. Lucky that people recorded what happened. Lucky that you and Sergeant Williams showed up instead of someone who would have backed Mitchell up. But how many people weren't lucky? How many people got arrested on false charges? How many people's lives were ruined because no one was there to stop him?" The silence that followed was heavy. Rodriguez looked at James for a long moment, and he could see the conflict in her eyes. Finally, she spoke. "There have been 3 formal complaints filed against Officer Mitchell in the past 2 years," she said slowly. "All 3 involved allegations of racial profiling. None of them resulted in disciplinary action because there wasn't enough evidence. It was his word against theirs. And without video or witnesses, the cases couldn't move forward. 3 that we know about," Williams added bitterly. "Who knows how many people didn't bother to file complaints because they figured nothing would happen anyway." James felt sick to his stomach. So he's been doing this for at least 2 years and he's still out here on patrol? Still pulling people over? Still harassing innocent citizens? "The system isn't perfect," Rodriguez admitted. "We need evidence to take action. We need proof. Tonight, thanks to you and those witnesses, we finally have that proof." "It shouldn't take a doctor with a phone and a dozen witnesses to get justice," James said. "It should happen every time for everyone." "You're right," Williams said. "And that's why this case is so important. It's going to force changes. It's going to make it harder for officers like Mitchell to hide behind the badge. Rodriguez's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and frowned. Internal Affairs is sending someone now instead of tomorrow. They want to interview everyone while the incident is still fresh. She looked at James. Dr. Carter, I know you've been through a lot tonight, but would you be willing to give a formal statement to IA tonight? James thought about his wife waiting at home, worried because he was so late. He thought about the hot shower he had been looking forward to, and the chance to just decompress from this nightmare. But then he thought about those 3 other people who had filed complaints and the countless others who had not. He thought about what might happen if he did not follow through right now, if he let exhaustion and trauma stop him from seeing this through. Yes, he said. I'll give a statement. Thank you, Rodriguez said sincerely. Your cooperation means a lot. A new car pulled up, an unmarked sedan. A woman in plain clothes got out carrying a briefcase. She had an ID badge clipped to her belt that identified her as Detective Lisa Chen, Internal Affairs Division. Captain Rodriguez, she said, approaching the group. I'm Detective Chen. I got the call about a possible civil rights violation and illegal search. That's correct, Rodriguez gestured to James. This is Dr. James Carter. He was pulled over by Officer Mitchell approximately 45 minutes ago. Dr. Carter, Detective Chen will be handling the investigation. Chen shook James's hand. Dr. Carter, I've already received your video file. I've watched it twice on my way here. I have to say it's one of the clearest examples of misconduct I've seen in my 15 years with IA. Then you'll do something about it? James asked. Absolutely. I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure Officer Mitchell answers for his actions. Chen pulled a recorder from her briefcase. Now I need to get your formal statement. Captain Rodriguez and Sergeant Williams, I'll need statements from both of you as well about what you observed when you arrived on scene. For the next hour, James sat on the hood of his car under the streetlights recounting his story once again. Detective Chen asked detailed questions, making him clarify times, exact words that were said, and his emotional state throughout the incident. She was thorough and professional, and James could tell she took the matter seriously. When she interviewed Captain Rodriguez and Sergeant Williams, James listened to their accounts of what they had found when they arrived. Rodriguez described Mitchell's defensive posture, his inability to provide coherent probable cause, and the obvious discrepancy about the taillight. Williams talked about the scattered belongings, James's visible distress, and Mitchell's complete lack of professional conduct. One more thing, Chen said, turning back to James. You mentioned that Officer Mitchell made several comments about your car being too expensive and questioned how you could afford it. Can you remember his exact words? James closed his eyes, remembering. He said, "How does someone like you afford a car like this?" And later he said, "Someone like you probably stole it or bought it with illegal money." He also said, "You people always have fake papers," when I told him my registration was legitimate. Chen's expression hardened as she wrote this down. Someone like you people, that's pretty clear language. It's textbook racial profiling, Williams added. He wasn't even trying to hide it. Oh, he was trying to hide it, Rodriguez corrected. That's why he made up the story about the taillight and the marijuana smell. He was trying to create a legitimate reason for the stop after the fact. But he wasn't smart enough to do it convincingly. Chen closed her notebook. Dr. Carter, I want to thank you for your patience and cooperation tonight. I know this has been traumatic. I'm going to recommend that Officer Mitchell be suspended without pay, pending the outcome of this investigation. Based on the evidence I've seen so far, I'll also be recommending termination and possible criminal charges. Criminal charges. James was surprised. What he did tonight wasn't just against department policy. It was illegal. False imprisonment, illegal search and seizure, possible civil rights violations. The district attorney will have to decide whether to prosecute, but I'm going to recommend they consider it. James felt a wave of relief wash over him. Someone was finally taking this seriously. Someone was actually going to hold Mitchell accountable. What about the other complaints? James asked. The 3 people who filed reports before me? I'll be reopening those cases, Chen said. If there's a pattern of behavior, it's relevant to this investigation. And those complainants deserve to know that their voices mattered, even if we couldn't help them at the time. Sergeant Williams approached James as Chen packed up her equipment. Dr. Carter, I want you to know something. Most officers, the vast majority of us, were nothing like Mitchell. We're ashamed that he wore the same uniform we wear. We're ashamed that he represented our department this way. I believe you, James said. And he did. Meeting Rodriguez, Williams, and Chen had restored some of his faith in the system. Not all of it, but some. But, Williams continued, belief isn't enough. We need to do better. We need to make sure this never happens again. And that starts with making an example of Mitchell. That starts with showing everyone, officers and citizens alike, that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated. James looked at the three of them, Rodriguez, Williams, and Chen. They were good people trying to do the right thing in a broken system. But good people were not enough. The system itself needed to change. I hope you mean that, James said quietly, because I'm not the first person this has happened to, and unless things change, I won't be the last. We mean it, Rodriguez said firmly, and your case is going to help us make those changes. As James finally drove away that night, his mind was full of conflicting emotions. Relief that it was over. Anger at what had happened. Hope that something good might come from it. And a determination to make sure his experience would not be in vain. James finally pulled into his driveway at nearly 9 o'clock at night. The porch light was on, and he could see his wife Sarah's silhouette in the window. She must have been watching for him, worried sick. The moment he opened the car door, she rushed out of the house. James, where have you been? I've been calling and texting for hours. Her worried expression changed to alarm when she saw his face. What happened? Are you okay? James got out of the car slowly, his body feeling heavy with exhaustion. I got pulled over. Pulled over? For what? For being black and driving a nice car in a white neighborhood, James said flatly. The words came out more bitter than he intended, but he was too tired to soften them. Sarah's face went pale. She had heard stories like this before, had worried about this exact scenario, but hearing it had actually happened to her husband made it real in a terrifying way. Oh my God, James, did they hurt you? No, but they could have. He explained what had happened as they walked into the house. Sarah listened with her hand over her mouth, tears forming in her eyes. When he told her about Officer Mitchell's comments and accusations, she grabbed his hand tightly. We should sue, she said immediately. We should go to the media. We should make sure everyone knows what happened. We will, James assured her. But right now I just need to sit down. They sat together on the couch, Sarah holding James as the reality of what could have happened washed over both of them. He could have been arrested. He could have been hurt. In the worst case, he could have been killed. Another name on a list of unarmed black men who died during routine traffic stops. James's phone buzzed. It was a text from Sergeant Williams with a link to a news article. The story was already out. Local doctor racially profiled during traffic stop, read the headline. The article included statements from Captain Rodriguez and mentioned that Officer Mitchell had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. It's starting, James said, showing Sarah the article. Over the next 3 days, the story exploded. The video James had recorded went viral on social media, viewed millions of times. The videos from the neighbors and the teenage boy spread just as quickly. News stations picked up the story. Reporters called James's phone constantly. The hospital was flooded with media requests for interviews. On the second day, James received a call from the mayor's office. The mayor wanted to meet with him personally to apologize and discuss police reform measures. James agreed, knowing that his voice could help create real change. The mayor's office was impressive, with dark wood paneling and large windows overlooking the city. Mayor Patricia Johnson stood when James entered, coming around her desk to shake his hand warmly. Dr. Carter, thank you for coming. I cannot tell you how sorry I am for what happened to you. It was unacceptable, and it does not represent the values of this city. With respect, Mayor Johnson, it does represent what happens in this city, James said firmly. Maybe not to everyone, but to enough people that it's a serious problem. The mayor nodded, her expression serious. You're right, and that's why I want to do something about it. I'm forming a task force on police reform. I'd like you to be part of it. What kind of reform are we talking about? James asked. He had heard politicians make promises before, promises that led nowhere. Real reform, the mayor said. Mandatory body cameras that can't be turned off. Stricter policies on when officers can search vehicles. Better training on implicit bias and de-escalation. A citizen review board with actual power to discipline officers. And most importantly, a zero-tolerance policy for racial profiling. James listened carefully. And what about Officer Mitchell? That's not up to me, the mayor said. That's up to internal affairs and the district attorney. But I can tell you that I've made my position very clear to both offices. I want accountability. 3 days after the incident, James received a call from Detective Chen. Dr. Carter, I wanted to update you on the investigation. Officer Mitchell has been suspended without pay. We've completed our initial investigation and I'm recommending termination and criminal charges. What kind of criminal charges? James asked. Deprivation of rights under color of law, illegal search and seizure, and false imprisonment. The district attorney is reviewing the case now. If they decide to prosecute, Officer Mitchell could face up to 10 years in prison. James felt a mix of emotions. Relief that Mitchell was being held accountable. Sadness that it had come to this. And anger that it took video evidence and a viral news story for the system to work the way it should have worked from the beginning. Detective Chen, what about the other people? The ones who filed complaints before me? I've contacted all 3 of them. They're willing to testify about their experiences with Officer Mitchell. Their cases are being reopened. If we can establish a pattern of behavior, it strengthens our case significantly. That afternoon, James received another call, this time from Officer Brennan, the man whose life he had saved 3 months earlier. Brennan's voice was thick with emotion. Dr. Carter, I just heard what happened. I can't believe Mitchell pulled that on you. After everything you did for me, for my family, I want you to know that I've already given a statement to IA. I told them that you're a hero, that you saved my life, and that what Mitchell did was disgraceful. Thank you, James said quietly. That means a lot. I'm ashamed to wear the same uniform as someone like him, Brennan continued. Most of us aren't like that. Most of us are trying to do good. But guys like Mitchell make it impossible for people to trust us, and I understand why. The support from Brennan, from Captain Rodriguez, from Sergeant Williams, it all helped. But James knew that individual good officers were not enough. The system had to change. A week after the incident, James attended his first police reform task force meeting. The room was filled with community leaders, activists, religious figures, and police officials. The tension was thick, with decades of mistrust hanging in the air. Sergeant Williams was there, representing the police union. He stood up to speak, and James could see how difficult this was for him. I've been a cop for 22 years, Williams began. I became a police officer because I wanted to protect people, to serve my community. But I can't deny the reality anymore. There's a problem in our department. There's a problem in police departments across this country. And that problem is that some officers, like Mitchell, abuse their power. They target people based on race. They violate rights. And for too long, the system has protected them instead of protecting the people they're supposed to serve. He paused, looking around the room. Dr. Carter's case has opened my eyes to how often this happens without consequences. I've decided to support every reform measure this task force proposes. Body cameras that can't be turned off. Citizen review boards. Stricter discipline. Whatever it takes to restore trust between police and the community. The room erupted in discussion. Some police representatives pushed back, arguing that these reforms would make it harder for officers to do their jobs. But Williams held firm, and Captain Rodriguez backed him up. If doing our jobs means violating people's rights, Rodriguez said sharply, then we need to change how we do our jobs. James spoke last. He told his story again, but this time he focused on what needed to change. He talked about the fear he felt, the humiliation, the knowledge that without video evidence he probably would have been arrested. He talked about the 3 other victims who had filed complaints that went nowhere. And he talked about all the victims who never filed complaints at all, who just lived with the trauma of being targeted and harassed. I was lucky, James said. I had witnesses. I had video. I had a job and education and resources. But what about people who don't have those things? What about the teenager who gets pulled over in his old car and can't afford a lawyer? What about the single mother working 2 jobs who doesn't have time to file complaints and fight the system? They deserve protection too. They deserve justice too. When the meeting ended, several people came up to thank James for speaking. A young black woman approached him with tears in her eyes. My brother was pulled over by Mitchell last year, she said. He was arrested for resisting arrest even though he didn't resist anything. He spent 2 nights in jail. He lost his job. We tried to fight it, but we couldn't afford a lawyer and no one believed us. Thank you for standing up. Thank you for making people listen. James felt the weight of that responsibility. His case was getting attention, but what about her brother? What about all the others? 2 weeks after the incident, the district attorney announced criminal charges against Officer Mitchell. The news conference was broadcast live on television. James watched from his office at the hospital, surrounded by colleagues who had come to support him. After a thorough investigation, the DA said, "We have determined that Officer Derek Mitchell violated Dr. James Carter's civil rights. He conducted an illegal search, made false accusations, and engaged in racial profiling. We are charging Officer Mitchell with deprivation of rights under color of law, illegal search and seizure, and official misconduct. These are serious charges that carry significant prison time," the DA continued. "This case has highlighted serious problems in our police department. We will be reviewing all complaints filed against Officer Mitchell over the past 5 years. We will be investigating whether other officers were aware of his conduct and failed to report it. And we will be working with the mayor's task force to implement reforms that will prevent this from happening again." James's phone buzzed with messages of congratulations and support, but he felt no joy in Mitchell's downfall. He felt only a grim satisfaction that accountability was finally happening, mixed with sadness that it had taken so much to get here. That evening, James received a call from Captain Rodriguez. "Dr. Carter, I wanted to let you know that Officer Mitchell submitted his resignation today. He's avoiding termination by quitting first, but he'll still face the criminal charges. He won't be able to work as a police officer anywhere else." "How are you feeling about all this?" James asked. Rodriguez sighed. "Honestly, relieved that he's gone, angry that it took this long, determined to make sure we do better. The department is implementing new training starting next month. Every officer will go through implicit bias training and de-escalation training. We're also starting a program where officers spend time in the communities they serve, building relationships instead of just enforcing laws." "That's a good start," James said. "It's just a start," Rodriguez agreed. "We have a long way to go. But your courage in speaking up and pursuing this even though it was difficult and traumatic, that's what made this possible. You should be proud of that." After the call ended, James sat in his home office looking at the stack of letters he had received. Some were from other victims of police misconduct, thanking him for giving them hope. Some were from police officers, apologizing for their profession's failures. Some were from community members offering support and solidarity. One letter stood out. It was from the teenage boy who had witnessed the traffic stop and had bravely stayed to record it. The boy wrote about how scared he had been, but how he knew it was important to document what was happening. He wrote that James had inspired him to want to become a civil rights lawyer someday. James folded the letter carefully and put it in his desk drawer. This was why it mattered. This was why he had to keep speaking up, keep pushing for change, even when it was exhausting and painful, because somewhere out there people were watching, learning, finding courage. Sarah came into the office and placed her hand on his shoulder. "How are you holding up?" "I'm tired," James admitted, "but I'm okay." "We're making progress. You're making progress," Sarah corrected. "You're changing things." James looked up at his wife and managed a small smile. "We're changing things. Together." Outside his window, the sun was setting over the city. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to fight. But tonight, James allowed himself to feel hopeful. Change was possible. Justice was possible. It was hard and slow and required constant vigilance, but it was possible. And that made all the difference. 3 months had passed since that evening on Maple Street. The world had not transformed overnight, but ripples of change were spreading outward in ways James had not anticipated. He sat in his car in the hospital parking lot, taking a moment before his shift to read through the morning news on his phone. The headline caught his attention. Former Officer Mitchell sentenced to 3 years in prison for civil rights violations. James read through the article carefully. Mitchell had pled guilty to avoid a longer sentence. The judge had been harsh in his remarks, stating that those who swore to protect and serve had a special duty to uphold the law, and Mitchell's actions had betrayed that duty in the worst possible way. 3 years was not a lot, James thought, but it was something. It was accountability. His phone buzzed with a text from Sergeant Williams. "Saw the news. Justice served, even if it feels insufficient. Hope you're doing well." James texted back a simple thank you and headed into the hospital. As he walked through the emergency room, several nurses and doctors greeted him warmly. They had all been incredibly supportive through everything that happened. The hospital administration had even released a statement condemning Mitchell's actions and expressing pride in James for standing up for justice. "Dr. Carter," called out one of the younger residents. "We have an MVA coming in, ETA 2 minutes. Multiple injuries." James snapped into doctor mode, pushing everything else from his mind. This was why he became a physician, to help people in their moments of greatest need. The next few hours passed in a blur of trauma cases, difficult diagnoses, and life-saving procedures. It was exhausting work, but it felt good to focus on something where the right and wrong was so clear, where success and failure could be measured in heartbeats and breath. During his lunch break, James checked his email and found a message from the mayor's office. The Police Reform Task Force had finalized their recommendations, and the City Council would be voting on them next week. James scanned through the list. Mandatory body cameras that officers could not disable, a civilian oversight board with real power to investigate complaints and recommend discipline, enhanced training on implicit bias and community relations, stricter guidelines on when searches could be conducted, and a new early warning system to identify officers with patterns of problematic behavior before they escalated. James forwarded the email to Sarah with a message. "We did it. Real reforms are happening." Her reply came quickly. "You did it. I'm so proud of you." But James knew it was not just him. It was the neighbors who had come out with their cameras. It was the teenage boy who stayed to record when he could have just ridden away. It was Captain Rodriguez and Sergeant Williams who did the right thing, when they could have covered for a fellow officer. It was Detective Chen who pursued the investigation thoroughly. It was all of them together. That afternoon, James received an unexpected visitor at the hospital. Officer Brennan, the man whose life James had saved, showed up in the emergency room looking nervous. "Dr. Carter, do you have a minute?" Brennan asked, of course. "Is everything okay?" "Yes, I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. I wanted to tell you something." Brennan shifted his weight from foot to foot. "After everything that happened with Mitchell, I've been doing a lot of thinking. About the kind of officer I want to be. About how I can make a difference." "Okay," James said, curious where this was going. "I've volunteered to help with the new training program. I'm going to share my story with the new recruits, about how you saved my life and then how Mitchell treated you. I want them to understand that the people we serve are human beings with families and jobs and lives. I want them to see you as I see you, as a hero who saved my life, not as someone to be feared or suspected." James felt a lump form in his throat. "Officer Brennan, that means more to me than you know." "Just call me Tom," Brennan said. "And thank you. Thank you for saving my life. And thank you for not giving up on all of us just because of one bad officer." After Brennan left, James sat in his office for a moment, collecting himself. The trauma of that traffic stop had not disappeared. He still felt anxious when he saw police cars behind him. He still felt that knot in his stomach when he drove through certain neighborhoods. But moments like this reminded him why he kept fighting, kept speaking up, kept believing that change was possible. A week later, James attended the city council meeting where the reform measures were being voted on. The council chambers were packed with people from all sides of the issue. Police union representatives argued that some of the reforms would make officers' jobs more difficult. Community activists argued that the reforms did not go far enough. James sat quietly, listening to all the arguments. When it came time for public comment, James approached the microphone. The room fell silent. "My name is Dr. James Carter," he began. 3 months ago, I was pulled over by Officer Mitchell for no reason other than the color of my skin and the car I drive. What happened that night was traumatic and humiliating, but what happened after gives me hope." He looked around the room, making eye contact with people on all sides of the debate. "These reforms are not about making life harder for good police officers. They're about protecting good officers by weeding out bad ones. They're about rebuilding trust between police and the communities they serve. And they're about making sure what happened to me never happens to anyone else." James continued, his voice growing stronger. "I know some people think these measures are too strict, but I ask you to imagine yourself in my position that night, standing on the sidewalk while your belongings are scattered on the ground, being accused of crimes you didn't commit, afraid that one wrong move could cost you your life. If that was you or your child or your spouse, wouldn't you want these protections in place?" When he finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. Not everyone was clapping, but enough were that James felt the tide of public opinion was on the side of reform. The vote was close, but the reforms passed. As James left the council chambers that night, several people stopped to thank him. One elderly black man clasped his hand with tears in his eyes. "My grandson is 15, the man said. I've been so afraid for him, afraid of what might happen when he starts driving. These reforms, they give me hope that maybe he'll be safer. Thank you for fighting for him." James hugged the man, both of them understanding the weight of that fear, the burden that parents and grandparents of black children carried every day. 2 months later, James received an invitation to speak at the police academy. He stood in front of a room full of young recruits, men and women of all races who had chosen to become police officers. Some looked skeptical, others interested, all of them paying attention. "I'm not here to tell you that all police officers are bad," James began. "I'm here to tell you about my experience with one who was and to challenge you to be better." He told his story again, but this time he focused on what he needed from them. He talked about seeing people as individuals, not as threats. He talked about treating everyone with dignity, regardless of what they looked like or what they drove. He talked about having the courage to stand up to fellow officers who acted inappropriately, like Captain Rodriguez and Sergeant Williams had done. "The badge you're about to earn gives you power," James said, "but with that power comes responsibility. Every time you put on that uniform, you're making a choice about what kind of officer you want to be. You can be like Officer Mitchell, who let prejudice and ego guide his actions, or you can be like Officer Brennan, Captain Rodriguez, and Sergeant Williams, who chose to do what was right even when it was difficult." After his speech, several recruits stayed to talk with him. A young black woman shook his hand firmly. "Dr. Carter, I became a police officer because I want to change things from the inside," she said. "Stories like yours remind me why that matters. I promise I'll be one of the good ones." "I believe you will be," James said sincerely. A Latino man approached next. "My uncle had something similar happen to him 10 years ago. No one believed him. No video, no witnesses. He still doesn't trust police. But maybe now, with officers like me and these reforms, we can start to fix that trust." As James drove home that evening, he reflected on how far things had come. Mitchell was in prison. Reforms were being implemented. Officers were being trained differently, but he also knew that this was just the beginning. Real change would take years, maybe decades. There would be setbacks and resistance. But the foundation had been laid. His phone rang. It was Sergeant Williams. "Dr. Carter, I wanted to give you a heads up. The 3 people who filed complaints against Mitchell before you, they're filing civil suits against the department. And they're going to win. The department is settling out of court and issuing formal apologies." "Good," James said simply. "There's something else," Williams continued. "I've been promoted to lieutenant. I'm going to be in charge of community relations. Captain Rodriguez recommended me for the position. She said what happened with your case showed her that I had the integrity and judgment needed for the role. Congratulations, Lieutenant Williams. That's well deserved. I'm going to make sure that what we started with your case continues. I'm going to make sure those reforms are actually implemented, not just written down on paper. I promise you that." When James got home, Sarah met him at the door with a smile. "You have mail," she said, handing him a large envelope. Inside was a letter from the mayor, formally thanking him for his service on the police reform task force. But more importantly, there was a smaller envelope with no return address. James opened it carefully. The letter was from a young man named David, one of the 3 people who had previously filed complaints against Mitchell. He wrote about how he had felt hopeless after his complaint went nowhere, how he had stopped trusting the system, how he had carried anger and bitterness for years. But James's case had changed things. The department had reached out to him, apologized, and offered a settlement. More than that, they had believed him, validated his experience, and acknowledged that he had been wronged. "Thank you for not giving up," David wrote. "Thank you for fighting when I couldn't. Thank you for proving that justice is possible even if it takes time. You gave me my faith back." James sat down at his kitchen table, the letter still in his hands. He thought about that night 3 months ago, standing on the sidewalk under the streetlights, afraid and humiliated, but determined to stand firm. He thought about all the moments since then, the depositions and interviews, the task force meetings, the public scrutiny, the emotional toll it had taken. It had all been worth it. Sarah sat down beside him. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about how one moment can change everything," James said. How one traffic stop could have gone so wrong. But because people chose to do the right thing, it became a catalyst for change. You became a catalyst for change, Sarah corrected gently. James shook his head. No, we all did. Every person who recorded what happened, every person who spoke up, every officer who chose integrity over loyalty to a bad cop, every citizen who demanded accountability. It took all of us. That night, James stood in his driveway looking at his Mercedes. He had thought about selling it after everything that happened, trading it for something less conspicuous. But he had decided against it. He had earned this car through hard work and dedication. He had every right to drive it without fear. Selling it would be letting Mitchell win, letting prejudice win. He got in the car and drove through his neighborhood, then through Maple Ridge where the traffic stop had occurred. The elderly woman who had witnessed everything was out watering her garden. She saw him and waved enthusiastically. James waved back, smiling. As he drove, James passed a patrol car going the opposite direction. The officer inside, a young woman he did not recognize, nodded respectfully at him. No suspicion, no hostility, just a simple acknowledgement of a fellow citizen. It was such a small thing, but it represented something larger. It represented the possibility of a different relationship between police and community. James drove home thinking about the future. He thought about that young woman at the police academy, who promised to be one of the good ones. He thought about Lieutenant Williams taking on his new role in community relations. He thought about the reforms being implemented. He thought about David and the two others who had filed complaints finally getting justice. Change was happening. Slowly, imperfectly, but happening nonetheless. And it had started with one man standing his ground, refusing to accept injustice and believing that truth and persistence could make a difference. When James got home, he found Sarah had dinner waiting. Their two children, who had been staying with grandparents during the worst of the media attention, were back home. His daughter Maya ran to hug him. Dad, I saw your speech at the police academy on the news. You were amazing. His son David, named coincidentally the same as the letter writer, looked at his father with pride. My teacher said you're a hero, Dad. She said you made our city better. James knelt down to hug both of his children. I'm not a hero. I just did what was right. And that's what I want you both to remember. When you see something wrong, you speak up. When someone treats you unfairly, you stand firm. When the system fails, you work to fix it. That's what heroes do. That night, lying in bed next to Sarah, James finally felt at peace with everything that had happened. The trauma was still there, probably always would be. But so was the pride in what they had accomplished together. So was the hope for a better future. 3 months ago, Officer Mitchell had called for backup, expecting his fellow officers to support his misconduct. Instead, he got Captain Rodriguez and Sergeant Williams, officers who valued justice over loyalty to a corrupt colleague. That unexpected backup had changed everything. Sometimes the people who show up are not the ones you expect. Sometimes they surprise you, and sometimes those surprises change the world.